And we are on day 12 of the 20-day flower creation journey. My name is Luisa and this is the Lulu Blue Studio. Today we are going to paint something that might look a little bit intimidating. This is the hydrangea flower. Hydrangeas are beautiful round-shaped flowers that we are going to paint in a quite simple way to show you that everything is possible. So the first approach is to look at these hydrangea flowers, and I see that is in round shape with small flowers with round shaped petals. For this reason we are going to use this filbert brush and start to create small brush strokes using the belly of this brush. We are going to drag the blue, this is a mixture of cobalt blue with phthalo turquoise, and we keep creating these brush strokes all around just by touching the paper and pressing especially the belly of this brush around. I change the motion, but basically I use the belly of this brush and I drag the pigment, having in mind to create an overall round shape for this first flower. This is a loose style hydrangea, therefore I keep in mind that I don't need to be too precise, but I want an overall round shape for these flowers and many different petals that are characteristic of this flower. In order to create such a variety of petals, I keep in mind to change the color value of the pigment I have on the brush by removing part of the pigment in the cup of water, but I also remember to change the overall color, which is called hue, by adding a little bit of sometimes more phthalo turquoise and sometimes more cobalt blue to the mixture, in order to give the impression that there are different petals in these big flowers we are creating at the base of the page. While the painting is still wet, I keep in mind I can always add some more concentrated pigment into the first layer of painting, and I can allow a little bit of wet in wet happening, where maybe a darker blue, like in this case some phthalo turquoise, is blending with the first layer of pigment that is a little bit wet still, and it's mainly of cobalt blue, so it's a different blue. I'm giving the impression that there are more petals thanks to the wet in wet technique. This is the beautiful part of watercolor, and I encourage you to use it as often as you can. I start to create the second flower on top of the first one, and I proceed using the same technique. Therefore, I use mainly the belly of my brush to start to create these brush strokes, which are quite small, and I keep in mind to create a round shape where all of these petals are connected. We will connect them towards the end with some greeneries, so I keep in mind to have some white areas where in a second moment I will be able to add some stems. And I keep changing the color value and the color hues in order to create a flower that is very interesting to look at. With the wet in wet technique, I add some contrasting brush strokes that will blend into the first layer of painting. And overall, I keep adding these petals going from the inner part of the flowers towards the outer part of the flowers, trying to create as much as possible a round shape. In fact, this type of flower has a perfect round shape, I would say. Therefore, that's what I'm trying to achieve. And now I started to create a third flower on top of the page. I will create this one a little bit smaller in size, always following my reference picture. I see from the reference picture there are 3 main flowers, so this is what I'm trying to reproduce. And so I proceed creating these petals with different color values and color hues. The color hue is the color in itself. So in order to change the color hue, I will mix a different concentration of, for example, cobalt blue and phthalo turquoise. If you don't have these two colors, please use any other color that you have available. And I always take care also to change the color value, which is the amount and the concentration of blue that I have onto paper, by removing part of the pigment in my cup of water. Through the wet in wet technique, I add a few strokes of more concentrated pigment onto some petals that are already created and are still wet onto the paper. I keep adding brush strokes of different colors, in this case, for example, cobalt blue, until I'm satisfied with the amount of petals I see and until I'm satisfied with the quality of the wet in wet technique I'm able to achieve. And when I'm happy, I can start to create the stem and the leaves of these flowers. I started to mix a little bit of green earth and a little bit of sap green onto my palette, and I will be using my mop brush to start to create in first place the stems of these flowers. Since the blue is still wet, when I start to create the first stem of the third flower, some green will blend into the blue and it will create a beautiful effect of wet in wet. If you like this effect, you are welcome to try the same, but if you instead prefer to have a blue paint that is perfectly laid onto paper with no blending effect, just do not touch the painting with the green, or just wait to add the stems at a moment when the blue is going to be completely dry. I'm just using the fine tip of this brush in order to create these fine lines that are the stems, and I refine them when I like the overall shape that I've created. To create the leaves, I'm still going to use this mop brush, and I put some pressure starting from the tip and the belly of the brush, and I will drag my brush until I've accomplished to create a round shape leaf. In particular, these hydrangea leaves are pretty big in shape, are in round shape, and have some sort of saw blade edges, so something like teeth, I would say, that are coming out of these leaves. And I try to reproduce these by using the tip of my brush and just dragging out some of the pigment from the leaf that I've just created. You can create the same effect with a mop brush as I'm doing, or a very thin round brush can also do this work. Do not add a lot of pressure onto this movement, just keep your hand very light and just try to create these thin strokes. At this point, I'm creating a darker green and I'm mixing a little bit of cobalt blue into the sap green, because I've used the cobalt blue to create these hydrangea flowers. Therefore, I sort of close the gap between the two colors, and I just let some of this darker green bleed into the thick leaf that I've created. And when I created the second leaf, I used the same approach. I used the belly and I started to create first the first half of this shape, round shaped leaf, and then I created the second half of the leaf, and I used the tip and the belly to drag the pigment. I also add on this second leaf these pointy edges, and I keep in mind to keep my hand very light and not add too much pressure. I just drag out of the green leaf a little bit of pigment that is still wet. And at this point I noticed that there is some white space in the left area of this page. Therefore, I decided to create another leaf that is below the very first flower we created. And I use the belly and the tip of my brush and I drag and I create this round shape leaf in 2 steps. First I created the first half and then I created the second half, and I will add some color in the middle because my brush is too small to create such a big leaf. Therefore, in the beginning there is going to be some white space in the middle, but I can easily fill it up when the overall shape is going to be completely created. And then, as I did in the past, I refined the edges of this third leaf, just adding a little bit of pressure with the tip of my brush from the leaf, the internal part of the leaf, towards the external part of the leaf. And I create these edges that are typical of the hydrangea. You can also, for example, create these edges starting from the outer part of the leaf and dragging a little bit of pigment towards the internal part. You can try and see which method you like the most. At this point, I step back and I look at what I've created. I am quite happy, but I think I can add an additional leaf just under the second hydrangea we have painted, because there is some white space and I think an additional leaf could help the overall composition. So that's what I do. And I follow the same process of creating first the overall shape of the leaf and then adding these edges, dragging the pigment from the inner part of the leaf towards the external part of the leaf. I am quite happy with the painting so far, but we need to add one detail that is characteristic of these flowers, that is to add a little bit of stems, a few stems, in the inner part where we left the white spaces, because if you look at pictures of hydrangeas, these are many little flowers and they are bunched together by these stems. And we are going to add indeed these stems with a very thin tip of a brush, a round brush in size 6. I take back my mop brush because I noticed that one white area is quite predominant on the page. Therefore, I fill in this area under the third hydrangea I have created with another leaf, and I just add the edges as I've done in the past, and I let some green paint to blend into the painting of the leaf through the wet in wet technique. And I'm quite happy with the result of these hydrangeas. I do not wish to add any further details because I love this wet in wet effect we achieved. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and I hope to see you on day 13.